I am an old man now, sitting alone in the dim light of my study, surrounded by the remnants of a life I once thought was my own. Yet somehow, all of it now feels like a distant memory, almost like it never belonged to me. As I reflect upon the choices I have made, the paths I have taken, and the sacrifices I have endured, I cannot help but feel the weight of years pressing heavily upon my chest. I gave up everything I once held dear, my home, the house where I had raised a family, filled its walls with laughter and the echoes of days gone by. My business, built painstakingly over a decade with my own hands, where every corner, every desk, every file was infused with my sweat and dreams. My reputation, the respect I had earned in my community, the nods, acknowledgement, the smiles of neighbors and colleagues. All of it I left behind for one reason, one singular obsession. A young boy who had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, captured my heart in ways I could never explain, in ways that defied logic, reason, and even the very limits of what one might call love. From the first moment I saw him, something stirred deep within me, a longing so intense and overwhelming that it consumed every thought, every heartbeat, every breath. I remember the way he moved, the careless grace in his gestures, the subtle laughter that seemed to echo inside me long after it had faded from the air. I remember watching him from across rooms, from distant streets, from the crowded places where fate, in its curious manner, allowed our paths to cross. I was enthralled not just by his physical presence, but by the essence of who he was, the vitality, the youth, the energy that I felt I had lost long ago, yet through him I could somehow touch again. It was not merely attraction. It was an all-encompassing obsession, a need that went beyond desire, beyond companionship, and into the realm of devotion and surrender. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I found myself thinking constantly of him. Every decision I made, every plan I had for my life, was inevitably influenced by the thought of being near him, by the hope, however slim, that he might acknowledge me, that he might notice the depth of my feeling. I would rearrange my days, sacrifice my comfort, and endure hardships that I would never have imagined for someone else. Yet all these trials felt like small prices to pay for even a fleeting glance, a word, or a moment in his presence. I remember standing outside the cafe where he liked to spend his afternoons, pretending to read newspapers I didn't care about, all the while hoping that he would glance my way, that our eyes would meet, that a spark of recognition would pass between us. It rarely did, and yet I persisted, for the very thought of giving up was unimaginable, inconceivable. I began to distance myself from everything else that had once defined me. My family, my friends, my spouse, even my own career, all faded into insignificance compared to the gravity of this infatuation. I can still recall the night spent staring at the ceiling, imagining conversations, imagining confessions, imagining a life in which he and I were the only two people that mattered, a world where age, society, and propriety held no power. I told myself that I would endure whatever was necessary, that I could withstand any judgment, any loss, because the alternative, living without him, was a fate far worse than any disgrace or poverty. I remember the cold shiver that would run down my spine when he walked past me, oblivious of the devotion burning in my heart. And yet that shiver was mingled with an intoxicating joy, the thrill of proximity, the delicate hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he felt some echo of the same connection. Sacrificing my home, leaving behind the familiar walls, the comforting scent of aged wood and worn furniture, the memories embedded in every corner, was not easy. It felt like cutting off a part of my own soul, yet the idea of living somewhere far away, near him, seeing him more often, even from a distance, made the pain bearable, almost purposeful. My business, the empire of small triumphs and steady progress I had built over decades, seemed suddenly trivial compared to the enormity of the longing I felt for him. I sold what I could, transferred what I could, and left behind the rest, knowing that no amount of wealth or status could ever buy the one thing I craved most, his attention, his presence, his acknowledgement. And through all of this, I was acutely aware of the absurdity of my actions, the irrationality, the foolishness that others would surely see. Yet nothing could deter me. The whispers of society, the raised eyebrows of acquaintances, the judgment of family, all fell away before the immensity of my fixation. I was a man possessed not by demons, not by madness, but by love, or perhaps obsession, perhaps desire, perhaps a yearning for a connection that defied reason. I knew I was vulnerable, exposed, and perhaps even pathetic in the eyes of the world. Yet in my heart, I felt nothing but clarity, a singular purpose that defined every waking moment. I remember the nights when I would lie awake, the house silent around me, thinking of him. I would replay every smile, every glance, every fleeting touch. I would imagine conversations that never happened, words exchanged that remain unspoken, confessions that might never come to pass. My mind became a labyrinth of possibilities, every path leading back to him, every choice evaluated only in terms of whether it brought me closer to his world. And in those quiet hours, I realized with a strange mix of pain and ecstasy that this was a life I had chosen, the path I had walked, and there was no turning back. I had surrendered everything to the gravity of my feelings, and though the cost was immense, I would not have it any other way. I followed him everywhere, not because I had nothing else to do, but because my entire existence had begun to revolve around him. Each morning, my day began with a singular thought. Where was he now? What was he doing? And how could I somehow cross his path without it seeming too deliberate, too forced, too desperate? I would watch him walk through streets, cafes, and parks, careful to maintain a distance that would allow me to observe without alarming him. Yet, even as I tried to remain invisible, the mere act of seeing him, even from afar, would fill me with a strange, almost painful exhilaration. Every smile he gave someone else, every laugh, every word exchanged with friends, it felt like a dagger to my heart, and yet I could not tear my eyes away. I was addicted to his presence, addicted to the mere fact of him existing, and that addiction consumed me wholly. I remember the countless days I would position myself near the places he frequented, pretending to read newspapers I had no interest in, or pretending to shop while my mind wandered entirely toward him. I would memorize the way he laughed, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the tilt of his head when he listened to someone speak. Every nuance, every small motion became a point of obsession, a mental photograph I replayed endlessly in my mind. I recall one particular afternoon, a rainy day where the streets glistened with wet reflections. When he passed by a small bookstore, I stood at a distance, umbrella held above my head, heart pounding, watching him glance at the titles, flipping pages casually, completely unaware that someone was following his movements with such devotion. In that moment, the world around me ceased to exist. There was nothing but him, and the way my heart ached to be near him. Despite all my efforts, he often remained completely indifferent to my presence. There were times I would summon the courage to approach, to say a simple hello, but my words would falter on my lips, or I would see him smile at someone else, or be swept away by his friends, leaving me frozen in place, heart sinking. I tried to convince myself that this was all part of a larger plan, that patience would eventually reward me, that if I waited long enough, he would turn around, see me, and recognize the devotion that had silently followed him for months, even years. Yet each rejection, each overlooked greeting, each ignored attempt felt like a slow, persistent torture, a reminder that no matter how deeply I loved him, he might never return it. I remember vividly the small acts of cruelty, not intentional cruelty perhaps, but moments that etched themselves into my memory with painful clarity. He would speak casually of plans, trips, or friends, never once acknowledging the silent figure in the distance. He would accept rides from others, laugh with peers, share stories and jokes with companions, while I remained in the background, invisible and unheard. Sometimes I tried to force myself into conversation to offer help or advice, but he would brush past me, polite but distant, leaving me desperate for a sign, any sign, that I mattered to him. Every slight, every indifference, every act of avoidance cut deeper than any knife could. Yet I would not walk away. I became consumed with imagining scenarios, rehearsing conversations that never happened, dreaming of moments where he would turn to me, smile, and finally recognize the devotion that had followed him like a shadow. I would speak to him in my mind, whisper words of love and longing, imagine the warmth of his hand in mine, the softness of his voice saying my name. These fantasies were vivid, immersive, and sometimes cruelly intoxicating. Because in my mind they were real, but in the real world, he remained distant, elusive, and seemingly unattainable. There were nights I spent wandering the streets, retracing the paths I thought he might take, hoping for a glimpse, a chance encounter, or even the briefest acknowledgement. I remember one such night, under the pale glow of street lamps, rain slicking the sidewalks, when he passed me without a glance. I felt my chest tighten, an ache so profound it seemed to reverberate in every bone, every muscle. I longed to call out, to run after him, to confess all that had burned within me for years, yet some paralyzing fear held me back. Fear of rejection, fear of ridicule, fear of shattering the fragile thread of connection that might someday bind us together. And so I followed quietly, silently, heart full of longing and despair. I tried to rationalize my obsession. I told myself that age was irrelevant, that love transcended time, that devotion was more important than appearances or propriety. Yet, even as I clung to these beliefs, I could not deny the emptiness I felt when he ignored me, the loneliness that settled deep in my chest. I began to see the world in terms of proximity to him. Every decision, every action, every movement measured against whether it brought me closer to him or further away. Friends and family became distant, hobbies and pastimes meaningless, as if life outside his orbit no longer had purpose or color. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of him smiling at others, laughing freely, and I would feel a bitter mix of jealousy and longing. Yet, paradoxically, even these moments gave me a strange pleasure. They reminded me that he existed in the world, that his presence was tangible, that his life continued, and that somehow, someway, I remained a part of the tapestry of his existence, even if only as a shadow, as an unnoticed admirer, as someone whose love was profound, unacknowledged, and unfulfilled. Through all of this, my life became a series of silent vigils. I would wait for him, follow him discreetly, endure the pain of being unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged, yet I would return the next day and the next, driven by a love that had become inseparable from my very being. I knew it was madness, perhaps a folly, but I also knew that I could not stop, could not turn away, for he had become the axis around which my entire existence now revolved. I remember the days when I tried to bridge the gap, offering small kindnesses, gestures of concern, little gifts or words of encouragement, hoping that he would notice the care, the attention, the devotion I had quietly poured into his life. But more often than not, these gestures went unnoticed, brushed aside, or misunderstood. And yet I persisted. Persistence became my identity. My love became my raison d'etre. The world outside him became a blur, inconsequential, meaningless. Even in my despair, even in my repeated failures, I found beauty in the smallest glimpses. The way his hair shone in the sun, the curve of his smile, the sound of his laughter echoing through the corridors of cafes and streets. Every detail, every moment became immortalized in my memory, a record of devotion that the world could not see, a love that existed solely in the quiet chambers of my heart. And so, day after day, week after week, year after year, I followed him. I loved him silently, deeply, obsessively. I sacrificed my comfort, my pride, my dignity, all for the hope that he might, one day, turn to me and see me as I saw him, as the center of my world, the heartbeat of my existence, the singular reason I continue to breathe. I loved him so deeply that it consumed every aspect of my existence. The intensity of my feelings was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life, not even in my youth, not even with my wife or family. Each day, each hour, each minute that I spent thinking of him, longing for him, imagining him, felt like a heartbeat in my chest, a pulse that I could neither escape nor control. The love I felt was all-encompassing, all-consuming, and all-defining. It wasn't just attraction. It was a total surrender of myself, my life, my priorities, and my very being. I even left my wife, the woman I had lived with for decades, someone who had shared my life, borne my children, shared my joys and sorrows. I left her not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but because the love I felt for this boy overshadowed every other relationship I had. The comfort of her presence, the safety of our shared life, the expectations of society, all became meaningless when compared to the burning, unrelenting need to be with him, to serve him, to exist for him. I remember the day I told her I was leaving. Her eyes were filled with disbelief, pain, and hurt. I felt my own heart twist in anguish. Yet even in that moment, my mind could only think of him, the boy whose presence had come to dominate every corner of my heart. Leaving my family business behind was another sacrifice of monumental proportions. The enterprise I had nurtured, grown, and protected for decades suddenly seemed trivial compared to the urgency of my feelings for him. Each file, each contract, each investment, each employee who relied on me for guidance, all of it faded into insignificance. I remember standing in the office for the last time, looking at the mahogany desks, the carefully organized shelves, the photographs of past milestones, and feeling a mixture of grief, regret, and liberation. Every object, every memory, every symbol of my hard work seemed suddenly irrelevant because none of it could bring me the one thing I wanted most. Him. It was not a simple or easy decision. To abandon a life that had been built over decades, to walk away from security, wealth, and comfort, required not just courage, but a kind of reckless devotion that I had never known I possessed. I remember nights spent pacing my empty house, imagining the consequences, imagining the judgment, imagining the whispers and sneers of friends, neighbors, and colleagues. And yet the pull of him, the idea of being near him, even if only in glimpses, drove me to make choices that no rational man would make, choices that defied logic, reason, and expectation. As our friendship grew, I found that the intensity of my love for him was mirrored, in some ways, by the intimacy of our interactions. We shared long conversations, moments of laughter, and secrets that no one else could know. There were times when I would hold his hand lightly, pretending it was accidental, and feel my heart leap at the warmth, the connection, the electricity that passed between us. There were times when I would watch him sleep, or watch him focus on something as mundane as reading a book, and feel a swell of love so strong it brought tears to my eyes. Every moment with him became a treasure, every gesture a symbol, every glance a story. Our relationship, though never openly acknowledged to the world, became a profound emotional bond. We would talk late into the night, sharing fears, dreams, and desires. I remember one particular night when he confided in me about his insecurities, about his struggles with friends, about moments when he felt lost or uncertain. As I listened, my heart broke with empathy and love, and I reached out to comfort him, gently, tenderly, as though by doing so I could shield him from every pain in the world. And in that moment, something shifted. There was a closeness, a trust, a reliance that went beyond mere friendship. It became love in its purest, most intimate form. I began to imagine a life in which we were together, not just in secret, not just in fleeting moments, but fully, openly, as partners, as equals, as companions for life. I would picture waking up next to him, preparing meals together, walking through streets hand in hand, facing the world together. I would imagine introducing him to friends, sharing memories, building a life where age, past, and social judgment held no power. These dreams, though sometimes fragile and fleeting, gave me hope, gave me a sense of purpose, and drove me to endure the challenges of the real world with patience, resilience, and devotion. Yet, even as our bond deepened, I was acutely aware of the societal implications of our relationship. I knew the judgments, the whispers, the disapproval that would greet us if our feelings were discovered. I knew the limitations imposed by age, by experience, by expectation. And yet, these considerations felt small, trivial, and inconsequential compared to the reality of what I felt. Love, in its raw, unfiltered form, does not negotiate with reason, does not pause for propriety, does not compromise for logic. I had surrendered to it completely, willingly, without hesitation, without fear. I remember the small acts that brought us closer. The way he leaned into my shoulder during conversation, the way he laughed at a joke only I understood, the way he confided in me about things he never shared with anyone else. Each of these moments became immortalized in my memory, etched into my heart with an intensity that nothing else could match. I would replay these moments endlessly, drawing strength, solace, and hope from them, as if they were proof that my sacrifices, my devotion, and my unwavering love were not in vain. In this period of growing intimacy, I also began to confront the depth of my own vulnerability. Loving him so completely, investing my entire being into his presence, meant exposing myself to potential pain, heartbreak, and betrayal. I knew that my emotions were fragile, that my trust was absolute, that my dependence on his affection was total. And yet, I embraced this vulnerability with open arms, understanding that the risk was inseparable from the reward. The very act of loving him so fully became an act of courage, an assertion of my own humanity, a testament to the power of devotion beyond reason. One day, without any warning, without any hint or signal, he left. It was sudden, abrupt, as if all the time, all the affection, all the laughter and intimacy we shared had been nothing more than a fleeting illusion, a dream that had no bearing on reality. I remember the morning vividly. Sunlight streaming through the windows, the air filled with a faint scent of coffee, the world seemingly ordinary, and yet my entire existence was about to be shattered. I woke that day with the usual anticipation, hoping to see him, hoping to hear his voice, hoping to catch even a glimpse of the warmth that had once illuminated my life. But that day, he was gone. At first, I thought it was temporary, that perhaps he had some errand, some appointment, some fleeting distraction. I waited for hours, staring at the door, staring at my phone, replaying every message, every word, every glance we had shared. Yet the hours stretched into days, and days into weeks, and he did not return. Slowly, painfully, I began to realize the truth. He had chosen someone else, someone new, someone who had captured his attention in ways I thought only I could. My heart would have been filled with unyielding love and hope, crumbled into fragments I could not gather. Every memory, every moment, every dream we had shared seemed suddenly meaningless, a cruel mockery of the devotion I had poured into him. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was existential. I had sacrificed everything for him. My family, my business, my social standing, my comfort, even my dignity. And yet, for all that, he left. He left as if my sacrifices were invisible, as if my love was insufficient, as if my very existence had never mattered to him at all. I remember sitting alone in my empty house, the silence deafening, the walls echoing the emptiness that now consumed me. I wept for hours, for days, for weeks, each tear a testament to the intensity of the love that had been rejected, each sob a reminder that the one person I had devoted my life to had abandoned me without a second thought. In the beginning, I could not accept it. I convinced myself that there must have been a reason, some misunderstanding, some temporary lapse in judgment. I replayed every interaction in my mind, searching desperately for clues, for hints, for explanations. Was there something I had done wrong? Had I been too eager, too forward, too intense? Or was it simply the nature of youth, of boys, of fleeting affection, to enjoy love without the capacity to sustain it? These questions haunted me relentlessly, gnawed at my sanity, and yet no answers came. The absence of answers became its own torment, a vacuum in which hope and despair coexisted in painful equilibrium. I remember the moment I first saw him with others, with friends I had never met, with companions who seemed to belong to a world I could no longer access. He laughed, he joked, he shared stories, and in that laughter I heard the echoes of my own devotion, now rejected, now meaningless. I remember feeling a strange mix of jealousy, sorrow, and numbness, as if part of me had died while another part clung desperately to memory. I wanted to run to him, to plead, to cry, to reclaim what was lost, yet something held me back. A part of me knew that chasing him would only make my pain more acute, would only expose the depth of my vulnerability, would only confirm the extent to which I had surrendered myself for someone who could not, or would not, reciprocate. The pain became a constant companion, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. I would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, breath short, haunted by visions of him laughing, smiling, living without me. Every street, every cafe, every corner seemed infused with memories of his presence, as if the world itself had conspired to remind me of what I had lost. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, with travel, yet the absence of him was inescapable. Even in moments of joy, there was a lingering ache, a hollow space that no comfort could fill, a reminder that my love had been given freely, deeply, and now left unreturned. I began to confront the harsh realities of my devotion. I had invested my entire life into someone who did not value it, someone whose affection was conditional, fleeting, and ultimately unreliable. The sacrifices I had made, leaving my wife, abandoning my family, walking away from a life of stability and respect, now loomed as bitter reminders of the cost of loving too much, of loving without restraint, of loving someone who could not, or would not, love in return. I felt betrayed not only by him, but by the very nature of desire, by the cruel imbalance of human affection, by the fact that love, no matter how sincere, could be so easily discarded. There were moments when I considered giving up entirely, retreating into solitude, abandoning hope, and withdrawing from a world. The thought of living without him, of facing each day knowing that he had chosen to leave, seemed unbearable. And yet, even in my despair, there was a stubborn, persistent flame that refused to die. The memory of him, the image of his face, the echo of his laughter, the warmth of his touch. These memories became both solace and torment, a duality that defined my existence, a reminder that love, even unrequited, leaves an indelible mark on the soul. I realize, in the depths of my heartbreak, that some young boys are unfaithful. They play with hearts, they enjoy affection, they revel in the romance, and then they leave without warning, without explanation, leaving devastation in their wake. My love had been absolute, unwavering, and yet, in his eyes, it was never enough. I had given him everything, my time, my devotion, my life itself, and yet he walked away, choosing others, choosing novelty, choosing the fleeting thrill of companionship over profound, enduring love I had offered. Even as I tried to process my grief, I found myself reflecting on the nature of my obsession. Was it foolishness, madness, or a reflection of the depth of my humanity? I had surrendered completely, willingly, passionately, and in return, I was left with emptiness, a void that seemed impossible to fill. Yet, paradoxically, even in this pain, there was a kind of clarity. I understood more than ever the risks inherent in loving too fully, in trusting too deeply, in giving one's entire self to another. The pain of rejection was the price of the intensity with which I had loved, and though it was excruciating, it also affirmed the depth of my capacity for devotion, empathy, and vulnerability. Even after he left, even after the silence stretched over days and weeks, I could not bring myself to let go. My love for him, which had been the central axis of my life, had not diminished. If anything, it had grown more complex, more layered, more painful. I remember sitting in my empty house, surrounded by remnants of a life I had once cherished, my books, my furniture, my photographs, and yet all of it seemed meaningless. Nothing mattered except the absence of him, the emptiness left in his wake, the echo of a laughter that no longer included me. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself with old habits, with work, with errands, but every corner, every street, every shadow seemed to whisper his name, remind me of what I had lost, and taunt me with what I could never regain. I thought often about the way he had smiled at others, the way he had laughed with his friends, the way he had gone on with his life as though I had never existed. It was a bitter, relentless pain, sharper than any wound I had ever known. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I loved too much? Had I given too freely? Had I expected too much from someone so young? Someone whose heart was still unshaped, someone who had no idea of the sacrifices I had made for him? And yet, even in questioning, I could not find anger strong enough to fully condemn him, for I understood in my deepest self that he had not lied, he had not schemed. He had simply acted according to his own desires, according to the impulses and whims of youth that I, in my obsession, had chosen to accept without question. Even now, as I replay those memories, I realize that what I called love had been a surrender so complete that it left me vulnerable to devastation. I had given him my heart, my home, my life, my dignity, and in return, I had received only fleeting attention, moments of tenderness that vanished like mist, and then the final, crushing absence. I wept not only for the love that had been unreturned, but for the illusion of control I had once believed I possessed. I had thought that my devotion, my sacrifice, my persistence would ensure a connection, would guarantee that he would recognize my worth, would bind him to me. I was wrong. Yet, despite the betrayal and abandonment, I could not erase him from my life. His memory had become a permanent fixture in my mind, a haunting presence that followed me wherever I went. I would see shadows of him in passing strangers, in fleeting smiles, in gestures that reminded me of his subtle habits, his quirks, the little things that had once filled my days with joy. And each reminder was a torment. Each echo of his presence left me yearning, left me aching, left me mourning what could never be restored. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed to pause, I would imagine him returning. I would envision the day when he would realize that he had left something invaluable behind, that he had abandoned devotion so deep it could not be replicated, that he had walked away from a love that had defined a lifetime. I would picture the shock on his face, the hesitation in his voice, the longing in his eyes when he finally comprehended the magnitude of what he had forsaken. And yet, deep down, I knew this was only a fantasy, a fragile hope that kept my heart tethered to him, even as reality insisted that he had moved on. I also began to reflect on the cruel patterns of youth, the transient nature of affection in those untested years. Young boys, I realized, often do not comprehend the weight of devotion. They enjoy the thrill of attention, the excitement of romance, the indulgence of admiration, yet they are unprepared for the constancy, the depth, the endurance that true love demands. I understood now that my pain was not simply personal, but manifestation of a larger truth. That love, when given freely and fully, carries risks that the young may not be ready to bear, and those who give too much may often be left to confront the void alone. I thought about all that I had sacrificed for him, the stability of my home, the security of my career, the trust of my family, even my own sense of self-respect, and the bitter irony of it was almost unbearable. I had given everything for a connection that had proven fragile, ephemeral, conditional. I had trusted completely, without reservation, without calculation, without a thought for my own survival, and in return, I had received abandonment. And yet, in spite of this, my heart refused to harden, refused to turn away, refused to close the door to the possibility that one day, some part of him might return, might recognize, might care. Even now, as I live in the aftermath, I carry both love and pain intertwined. I see his face in dreams, hear his voice in echoes, remember his laughter in every quiet moment. I feel the pull of him still, an invisible thread connecting us across distance and time. And I understand that this love, though unfulfilled, though unreciprocated, has become a part of me, a scar that marks the depth of my capacity to feel, to care, to devote myself entirely to another being. The world may see only despair, only folly, only loss, but I know deep down that my love was real, unflinching, and enduring, and for that, it is sacred, even in absence. I also confronted the bitter realization that some love is meant not to be reciprocated, that sometimes the intensity of devotion outstrips the readiness of the beloved to accept it. And yet, to feel love so deeply, so entirely, even in the face of inevitable loss, is a testament to the power of human emotion, to the strength of the heart, to the courage required to give oneself fully, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when the consequences are devastating. My devotion had been absolute, my surrender complete, and even now, I cherish the fact that I love without restraint, without hesitation, without fear. In the end, I understood that love, in its truest form, is not measured by reciprocation, by recognition, or by permanence. It is measured by the willingness to feel, to care, to risk, and to endure. My love for him, though unreturned, was a reflection of the deepest parts of my humanity. And while my heart ached with absence, while my life felt hollowed by abandonment, I knew that my devotion had been genuine, and in that knowledge, I found a fragile, enduring solace. I loved him with all my heart, and yet I began to see the harsh truth about the nature of youth, of boys, of fleeting affections. It was a painful realization, almost unbearable, that the one I had sacrificed everything for, the one whose very existence had become the axis of my life, was capable of leaving so easily, of abandoning the devotion I had poured into him without a second thought. I began to understand that sometimes young boys, in their innocence or immaturity, do not grasp the gravity of love, do not comprehend the weight of sacrifice, and do not appreciate the depth of heart that gives itself completely. They chase excitement, novelty, attention, and companionship without realizing or caring how deeply they affect those who love them. I reflected on all the moments we had shared, the laughter, the quiet talks, the subtle touches, the small acts of intimacy that had meant the world to me. Each of those moments, once a source of joy, now felt like a cruel reminder of what had been taken from me, of what had been left behind. I realized that he had not been malicious, that his actions were not rooted in cruelty, but that his understanding of love was limited, shallow, or simply different from mine. And yet, the hurt was no less real, no less deep, no less agonizing. I mourned not only the loss of him, but the loss of the world I had imagined with him, the life I believed we could share, the dreams that now lay in ruins. The pain of betrayal is not always straightforward. Sometimes it is subtle, hidden in laughter that once felt shared but now feels exclusive to others. Sometimes it is quiet, revealed in absence rather than confrontation. I felt all of these pains at once. I had given him my time, my energy, my home, my dignity, and he had walked away with the ease of someone who had nothing to lose. I realized then that some young boys are unfaithful not out of malice, but out of instinct, out of desire for freedom, out of a lack of readiness for the depth of emotion that I had offered. And while understanding this intellectually offered a small measure of solace, emotionally it was a torment that gnawed at me day and night. I replayed our interactions endlessly in my mind, analyzing, questioning, and dissecting every gesture, every word, every moment. Had there been signs I missed? Moments where he had been distant, inattentive, or hesitant? Perhaps I had been blinded by my own obsession, seeing devotion where there was only curiosity, imagining love where there had been only fleeting affection. And yet, no matter how much I questioned myself, no matter how harshly I judged my own perception, the truth remained. My love had been real, unwavering, and total, and his departure left a wound that nothing could heal. Anger surfaced in waves, sometimes sudden, sometimes creeping silently. I felt anger at him, at the world, at the cruel imbalance between the intensity of my feelings and the impermanence of his devotion. I felt anger at myself for surrendering so completely, for allowing my heart to be vulnerable, for trusting without caution, for believing that love could conquer everything. And yet, intertwined with this anger was an inescapable tenderness, a persistent care that refused to vanish. Even as I acknowledged the hurt, even as I confronted the betrayal, I could not stop feeling love for him, could not stop hoping for a sign, a gesture, a moment of recognition that he had understood, even belatedly, what he had left behind. I began to see the cruel pattern repeated in countless stories, in countless relationships. The young, untested hearts take without understanding, give without realizing, leave without comprehension, and yet the ones who love fully, deeply, and without reservation are the ones who suffer most profoundly. I saw it in myself, and it was a painful mirror. My sacrifices, my home, my family, my career, my dignity, had been for a boy whose heart was not ready, not willing, or not capable of reciprocating at the same intensity. And yet, in recognizing this, I also realized the extraordinary nature of my own capacity to love, to endure, to care without expectation, to surrender entirely. Even in my despair, I clung to the memory of him. I could not erase him from my thoughts, could not sever the invisible threads that bound me to his existence. Every small detail, every fleeting gesture, every whispered word we had shared was etched into my soul. The world may have moved on. He may have moved on. My life may have continued in empty routines and hollow habits, but within me, he remained vividly alive. And this truth, painful as it was, became a cornerstone of my identity. My love, though unreciprocated, remained sacred, indelible, and unbroken, even in the face of betrayal. I reflected on the lessons that his departure had taught me. I understood that devotion without expectation is both a blessing and a curse, that loving fully carries both the ecstasy of connection and the agony of loss, that hearts given freely are exposed to vulnerability unlike any other. And while the bitterness of betrayal lingered, I also recognized the profound depth of what I had felt. I had loved with authenticity, without reservation, without pretense, and in that love there was power, there was meaning, there was truth. In the quiet solitude of my home, I allowed myself to grieve, to rage, to reflect, to cry. I honored the pain, the loss, the betrayal, and even the beauty of what had existed between us. I knew that healing would be neither swift nor easy, and that the memory of him would remain, sometimes tender, sometimes agonizing, always alive. And yet, in embracing the full spectrum of my emotions, the love, the anger, the hurt, the longing, I began to understand that my heart had survived, that my devotion had endured, and that the capacity to love so deeply, even in the face of betrayal, was a testament to my humanity, my courage, and my resilience. Even now, years after he left, his presence lingers in my heart as vividly as if he had never walked away. The emptiness that his departure created never fully healed, yet it became a part of who I am, every day. I feel the echo of his laughter in my mind, the subtle inflections of his voice in my memory, the warmth of his presence in the shadowed corners of my soul. The world outside moves on, as it always does, indifferent to the internal storm that rages within me, indifferent to the love that was given freely and yet returned only in absence. I have come to accept that life does not always offer closure, that some loves are meant to be remembered, not fulfilled, cherished, not possessed, and that the intensity of devotion sometimes becomes a testament to heart rather than a reward for beloved. I walk through streets we once shared, through places where our laughter once mingled, through the silent cafes and quiet parks, and every familiar object, every trivial sight, reminds me of him. A fleeting smile from a stranger may mirror his. A curve of sunlight falling on a bench may mimic the way he leaned back during a conversation. A scent of coffee may summon the memory of a shared cup in a rainy afternoon. In these small, everyday reminders, I am both tormented and comforted. I am tormented by the fact that he is gone, comforted by the fact that the love I carried for him was real, enduring, and profound. In my solitude, I often revisit our shared memories, not as an exercise in longing alone, but as a way to preserve the essence of what once existed. I remember the warmth of his hand brushing against mine, the subtle brush of shoulders in quiet hallways, the playful teasing that once lightened the heaviest of days. Every word spoken between us, every secret revealed, every act of intimacy, no matter how small, became imprinted onto the very fabric of my being. Though he no longer occupies my physical world, he occupies a permanent place in my heart, a sanctuary that no passage of time, no change of circumstance, and no other presence can ever erase. I have pondered countless times why he left, why his affection was fleeting, why he could not sustain the love that I had offered so unreservedly. Perhaps it was youth, perhaps inexperience, perhaps a natural inability to comprehend the gravity of devotion. Perhaps it was simply the nature of some hearts to roam, to chase novelty, to seek connection without commitment. And yet, in this understanding, I found no relief from the pain, only a framework to rationalize it. My heart still ached. My mind still replayed moments of our intimacy. My soul still reached for a presence that had vanished from the world, leaving only its imprint upon me. I have also come to realize that love, in its truest form, transcends reciprocation. It is not contingent on reward or recognition. The depth of my feelings for him was not measured by his response, but by my capacity to give, to feel, to surrender. Though my devotion went unanswered, it was nonetheless authentic, profound, and unshakable. I have carried this understanding like a torch through the darkest periods of my life, a reminder that even in unfulfilled love, there is strength, there is beauty, and there is meaning. My love was not diminished by his departure. If anything, it was refined, concentrated, and immortalized in memory. Even now, when the world is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts, I feel his presence most strongly. It is not a presence that offers comfort in the traditional sense. It is a presence that reminds me of all I gave, all I sacrificed, all I felt. It is a reminder that love can be both exquisite and painful, both sustaining and destructive, both liberating and imprisoning. In remembering him, I honor the capacity of the human heart to endure, to devote itself fully, and to survive the harshest trials of loss and betrayal. Life has moved on around me. Friends have come and gone. Family has aged. Careers have ended and begun anew. But the imprint of that love remains. It is a part of me, inseparable, indelible, a quiet force that shapes my decisions, colors my memories, and informs my understanding of human connection. Though he is gone, though the world has advanced and changed without him, my heart carries the proof of what once existed. A love that was boundless, selfless, and eternal in its intensity. And so, I continue to live, not in despair, but in remembrance. I honor the love I felt, the depth of my devotion, and the unyielding courage it took to surrender fully to another soul. I know now that some loves are not meant to last in the physical world, but they endure in the inner life of the heart, in the memory, in the spirit, and in the unbreakable bond formed through the act of loving so completely. His absence is a wound, yes, but it is also a mark of the extraordinary capacity of a human heart to love beyond measure, to feel beyond reason, and to dedicate itself to another without reservation. I have come to understand that true love does not demand possession. It does not seek reciprocity. It exists simply and purely in the act of feeling itself. Though he is gone, I continue to love, continue to feel, continue to exist with the memory of him shaping the contours of my inner life. It is a love that will never fade, a love that has transformed me, and a love that, despite all pain and betrayal, remains my most profound truth